I want to welcome you back to the Sovereign Kitchen Society. I'm Molly Bravo, chef, food preservationist, cookbook author, and of course, the founder of Wilder Space, our farm-to-table catering company rooted right here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. This podcast is where we dig into the lost kitchen skills, the things that our grandmothers knew in their bones that we have spent the last 70 years slowly forgetting. We're here to gather all of that wisdom back before it disappears completely. I've never met my grandparents. The thing that drives everything that I do here is the fact that I've never actually gotten to sit at their table. I've never watched their hands work. I've never asked them a single question. And I've spent a significant part of my adult life trying to find my way back to the people that I never got to know. What I do have, however, is my mother and what she carried from her mother in her hands in her kitchen. And that's the thread that I've chosen to follow. I still have living elders that are in my family, people that are in their 90s, like my dad, who remember the world that I'm trying to reach, who carry the stories of West Virginia and Kentucky. And I have made it my absolute mission. My mission is to sit with them and to ask them questions and to write everything down before it's gone. So this is what we're doing this season. This is the whole series. And today we're going to be going back to one of the most important women who ever lived in those mountains, who has absolutely shaped the world that my grandmother was born into. She's called a Granny Woman, and I think that you need to know about her. This season, we're doing a deep dive on what I have been calling granny wisdom, the traditions, the food practices, the herbal knowledge, the kitchen intelligence of the women who came before us. Women who kept their families alive without a grocery store, a pharmacy, or a doctor on call. Women who understood something about the land and about the body that most of us have completely lost. So before we go any further, if you're new here, please come find us on Instagram, TikTok. We're at the Sovereign Kitchen Society. Follow along there. That's where I share what we're cooking, what we're preserving, what's happening at Wilder Space, and the kind of content that's really meant to plant seeds. I'm talking about good seeds, of course, old seeds. This episode is sponsored by none other than yours truly, Wilder Space. That's my catering company, where we cook from the farm, from the forest, from the pantry, and of course from scratch. Every event that we do is rooted in these same values that we talk about here. So we're talking about seasonal, intentional, real food. If you want to learn more, you can find us at wilderspace.com. I want to start with the question itself. What the heck is a granny woman? I think most people may have heard the term and they've sort of have a vague picture in their mind of what a granny woman is. I'm imagining an old woman, maybe a little eccentric, living in the back of the hills. Maybe they picture something a little spooky. I want to dismantle that picture completely. A granny woman was the most important person in an Appalachian community. Full stop, most important. She wasn't a sideline figure. She wasn't a relic. She was the center of the family, the center of the community. She was the one that you called when a baby was coming into the world, when your child had a fever that would not break, when you burned yourself badly on the wood stove, when the man of the house was laid up with a back that gave out in the middle of the harvest, or when grief sat so heavy on someone in the holler that they literally could not get out of bed. You called her. She delivered babies. She made medicine. She sat with people who were dying. She showed up when a man had a deep gash and no doctor was within 20 miles. She worked for barter. a jar of honey, a side of cured pork, a week's worth of firewood stacked by the door. And it's not because she had to. It's because that is what you did when that was your role and you took it seriously. This is the part that I find so fascinating, and I think it is so important. A granny woman earned that title. It wasn't given to you because you were old. It wasn't passed automatically from mother to daughter. You had to demonstrate your knowledge. You had to prove that you understood plants, not just what they were called, but what they did and how and at what dose and in what combination. You had to prove that you could handle a birth when things went sideways. You had to prove that you understood the line between what the body could heal on its own with the right support and what needed something more. That took years, you guys, sometimes decades. One early 20th century sociologist wrote about Appalachian grannies and said, quote, "Though superstitious, she has a fund of common sense, and she is a shrewd judge of character. In sickness, she's the first to be consulted. She is generally something of an herb doctor, and her advice is sought by the young people of half the countryside in all things, from a love affair to putting a new web in a loom." A love affair of putting a new web in the loom. I love that. She was everything. The granny woman tradition in Appalachia is a layered thing, okay? It's not one origin, it's many that are woven together. The Scot-Irish settlers who came into these mountains in the 1700s brought their European herbal traditions with them. The plants were a different type of thing in the New World, so they had to learn from the Cherokee and other indigenous communities who had been reading these plants for thousands of years. And the African women who came into these communities, enslaved or otherwise, they brought their own deep knowledge of healing, root work, of what the body needs and what it does not need. All of it mixed. All of it into a blended, uniquely Appalachian tradition of practical, community-rooted healing that was held primarily by women. How awesome is that? How empowering is that? That mix, the Cherokee plant medicine, the Scot-Irish herbal tradition, the African healing knowledge, that is what the granny woman came out of. She wasn't just one thing. She was the result of people who had no choice but to share what they knew, because the mountains were super hard and everyone's survival depended on it. And when she died without passing it on, as so many of them did, that knowledge literally just disappeared. Poof, gone. Not in some archive somewhere. It wasn't written down. It was just gone. So what did she know? What she knew was the kitchen as medicine. I want to talk about what she actually did, because I think once you understand this part, you stop being able to call it folk superstition and you're able to start seeing it for what it actually was. It was a working system of medicine built from observation and practice and passed down through women who could not afford to get it wrong. And all of it ran through the kitchen. The granny woman's kitchen wasn't just where she cooked. It was where she worked. The hearth that she used to make cornbread was the hearth she used to render a poultice. The same pot that she used for a soup was the pot that she used to make a decoction. That's a strong medicinal tea that's brewed from roots and bark, not just leaves. The same hands that put up hundreds of jars of beans were the hands that dried bundles of the bone set for fever and elderflower for colds and spice bush for everything. So let me give you a little bit of what she knew. This isn't a list, but it's a real picture of her actual practice, okay? Let's first talk about elderberry. This is one that she almost certainly had growing near her home or knew where to find it in the woods. Now, we have it right here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Super stoked. You can find it in Scotts Valley, right at Sky Park. Little hidden gem. She was using it because she had watched over the years that people who took elderberry syrup at the start of a sickness had shorter and less severe illnesses. She had years of watching what worked. She made elderberry syrup or dried the berries and brewed them as a tea, and she started it early. The first sign of a cough, the first day a child felt warm. Catnip tea. This one usually surprises people. She used it for infants and for young children. Catnip is a very gentle nervine. It relaxes spasms, it calms, it eases colic and gas and the crying that comes from both of those things. She knew that catnip tea kept infants from getting hives. Calamus root. She stewed it down for colic. Red alder for hives and skin complaints. Bone set for fever and what we now call influenza. She'd make a hot tea from the leaves and have the sick person drink it and sweat. The name comes from the old belief that it could set bones. But its primary use, of course, was for the deep body aches of fevers. And then there was wild cherry bark. She made this for the cough, honey for the wounds that wouldn't close, and plantain, those super broad-leafed weeds that grow in pretty much every yard in Boulder Creek. She chewed on it and she put it directly on a bee sting. Most of what she used was not exotic. It was not rare. It was either growing in her yard or in her garden or in the woods within walking distance of her house. That was sovereignty. That was a woman who understood her land and knew that she was never without medicine. Her pantry wasn't just her food supply, it was actually her pharmacy, and a full pantry, as you know, is freedom. She knew that more than anyone. She also knew how to preserve her medicine the same way that she preserved her food. She dried herbs in bundles and hung them from the rafters. She made vinegar tinctures, herbs soaked in apple cider vinegar for weeks to put out the medicinal compounds. She made lard-based salves for skin. She rendered mullein flowers in oil for earaches. She packed roots in honey. She fermented things. And I'm not just talking about vegetables, but like medicinal plants, because she understood that fermentation was going to change what a plant could actually do in your body. She had words, she said, over a burn to talk the fire out. She had a ritual for a wart, prayers that went along with the poultice. And I'll be honest with you, what I think is that she understood something that we have mostly trained ourselves out of, which is that how a person feels while they're sick has a real effect on whether they get better. Mind over matter, as we would say now. Being held, being tended, having someone who is absolutely calm walk through your door and take charge. I'm going to pause for just a moment here because this is personal for me in a way that I am really eager to share. You know, I've never actually met my grandmother, Alberta, and I've been learning who she was through my mother's eyes, through my aunt's eyes, the way that she handled food, the way that the kitchen was run, the fact that nothing was ever wasted. You always had something put by. I didn't know to call that a philosophy when I was growing up. It was just how things were done in my house. We lived by the motto, waste not, want not. And now I understand. I totally get it. That is lineage. That's Alberta's hands that are working through my mother's hands that are now working through mine. And the research that I'm doing right now, the conversations that I'm having with the elders in my family who are still here, who are in their 90s. One of them even almost about to be 101 years old. And they remember things that I will never be able to find in any book. So that research is filling in what I've missed. It's making Alberta and my granny, Miss Minnie, very real to me. So I wrote the Essential Canning Cookbook. It's on Amazon. You can just search Essential Canning Cookbook and you're going to find it. I wrote it because I believe that knowing how to put your food up is the very first act of sovereignty. It is the foundation, period. A full pantry is freedom. Alberta knew that. My granny knew that. And now we're going to know it too. If preserving is where you want to start, that book is the best place to do it. Every single step, every method, water bath canning, pressure canning, because the Granny Woman's first and foremost important act every single year was putting food by. And we can do that too. So we're going to start here. This is the story of a granny woman. I want to tell you a story. It's a composite story, pieces of real women, real accounts from the Foxfire archives that I was telling you about in the previous episode, from people who have documented the tradition of Appalachian culture long before it disappeared entirely. Appalachian culture is still very much alive, but these women have since passed on, and it was so important to document their stories. So her name was something like Hetty or Pearl or Birdie Mae. And she lived in a hollow in the mountains, Wayne County maybe, or maybe somewhere in the Blue Ridge or up along the Virginia-Tennessee border. Doesn't really matter exactly where she lived, but what matters is what her days looked like. She was up before anyone else, not because she had to be, but because the day had edges that needed tending. Before the household woke, she might go out to the garden first because she needed to see what was ready and what wasn't. She needed to check on the comfrey because someone's child had hurt their wrist yesterday and she was planning a poultice for this morning. She checked her drying herbs, the bundles hanging from the rafters on her back porch. She made sure that the bone set was fully dry, turned the mullein, took down a bunch of mint that was ready and set it to the side. Breakfast was a big deal in her house. It was needed. Cornmeal porridge with lard and a little sorghum, maybe eggs from the chickens in the side yard, leftover soup beans from last night because waste was simply not a concept that she had space for. Every meal built on the last. Every meal used what was there. By mid-morning, she had been called to a neighbor's. A baby sick with croup or a man with a deep gash from the axe. She'd pack her basket, she kept it near the door, and in it, her tincture bottles, a clean cloth, a small tin of her salve, dried herbs in paper, a jar of one of her bone broths because she knew that a sick person needed warm, mineral-rich liquid more than almost anything else. She attended over 1,000 births in her lifetime. She knew how to turn a breeched baby with her hands. She knew which herbs brought on labor that was stalling and which ones could slow a hemorrhage. She knew the difference between a labor that was progressing safely and one that was going wrong. And it wasn't anything that she learned in a textbook, but from having been in the room more times than she could count. When she came home at the end of the day, she cooked for her own family. And when she cooked from everything around her. She wasn't above eating a weed. She knew which ones were good and which ones weren't. Ramps in the spring, wild garlic, she put up in vinegar. Poke salad early before it gets too mature and turns toxic. She cooked it down carefully, changing the water twice. Dock leaves in a pot with side meat, dried beans that she'd put up herself from last summer's garden, cornbread cooked in the same cast iron skillet that she had had for 30 years. She knew her family's health through their food. She knew that the child who wouldn't eat was getting sick. She knew that if her husband's appetite changed, his liver was probably struggling and she'd start adding more dandelion to his food. She read her family the way that she read the land, closely, with attention, and with accumulated knowledge that nobody had to explain to her because she earned it herself. And then she died. And in a lot of cases, she died before she fully passed it on because the world was shifting around her. The roads cut through the mountains. The young people left for towns with doctors and hospitals, and the old ways got filed under backward. A generation got told that modern medicine made her obsolete. So what she knew stopped. It was not archived. It was not preserved. It stopped when she stopped. That's the loss that we're talking about here. That's what is in the ground with her. So who is your family's granny woman? Was she in your family? Not every family had someone who carried the full granny woman title, but almost every family had someone who held some version of this knowledge. The grandmother who knew what to do when someone had a fever. The great aunt who kept an herb garden and knew which plants were medicine and which were food. The women who everyone in the neighborhood called when they didn't know what else to do. She might have been Appalachian. She might have been from Mexico, from the Philippines, from West Africa, from Eastern Europe. Every culture had her. She showed up in different kitchens with different plants, different prayers, and the same essential understanding. The home is where the healing begins. I want you to go find that woman in your family. I want you to call the oldest person that you have access to. Your grandmother, if she's still here. A great aunt, a cousin twice removed, who everybody says has the best memory. Ask them, who did the family go to when someone got sick? Ask them what was growing in the garden and what it was for. Ask them what your great-grandmother put up every fall. Ask them what the kitchen smelled like when someone was getting well. And then write it down, you guys, or pull out your phone and hit record. Most people don't mind. What they mind is being forgotten. What they mind is not being asked. These conversations, these stories, they're the last living thread that we have of something that is almost gone entirely. And once these people are gone, that's it. You're not going to be able to Google what your great-great-grandmother knew to do for a chest cold in the winter of 1912. You're not going to be able to find it in a book. It only exists right now inside the people who are still here. And they're not always going to be here. I come from West Virginia and Kentucky, my McCain and Wilson and Hammock and Holbrook lines. And I'm telling you right now, I didn't grow up knowing these women. I didn't sit at my grandmother's knee. I didn't get to ask her anything. What I got was what survived the distance. The things that made it through my mother, my father, the instincts and the habits and the kitchen ways that got passed along, even when nobody was calling it heritage, even when nobody was naming it at all. And now I have a choice about what to do with that. I get to fill in the gap. Or I can go looking. I can get on the phone with the 90-year-old cousin who still remembers my father, my uncle's mother-in-law. I can sit with my parents and I can ask them what their parents said, what the kitchen smelled like, who got called when someone was sick. I can treat this research like the sacred project that it is, because this is sacred work. I'm trying to find my way back to women that I never got to meet. And every story that I recover, every scrap of knowledge, I pull out of the past that goes deeper into this, into what we're building here together. So that's what I want for you too. As you know, I love to give 3 actionable steps that you can take this week that you can apply today if you choose to. So the first one is that I want you to go find some elderberries. You can find them in the health food store in the dried bulk section. You can find them outside if you're in Santa Cruz County. They're everywhere. It's late enough in the year that you can find dried elderberries very easily. I want you to make the most basic version of this dish. You're going to take 1 cup of dried elderberries. You're going to take 3 cups of water. You're going to bring it to a boil. You're going to reduce it to a simmer, and you're going to let it go for about 45 minutes until it's reduced by almost half. You're going to let it cool. You're going to strain out the berries. And once it's warm, but not hot, you're going to stir in half a cup of raw honey. You're going to store it in the jar or in a fridge. And you're going to take a tablespoon a day for prevention. It's more so if you feel something coming on, but that's what the Granny Woman used to make. That's what she had on her shelf all the time. And now you can too. The second thing that I want you to do, I want you to go talk to an elder in your family, and I want you to talk to them this week. I want you to call someone. I want you to sit down with someone. I want you to ask them specifically, who was the woman in our family that everyone went to when they were sick? And then I want you to listen. I want you to write it down or hit record on your phone. Most older people are going to love it. And the third thing I want you to do is I want you to look in your pantry and I want you to ask yourself what a granny woman would think of it. Does your pantry have depth? Does it have dried herbs? Does it have preserved food that's going to last you? Does it have the ingredients to take care of your family through a hard week without a grocery store run? Because if the answer isn't yet, that is exactly where we're going to start. We're going to start 1 jar at a time, 1 skill at a time, because a full pantry is freedom. The Granny Woman knew that, and now we know it too. In closing, I think about the Granny Woman all the time. It lights me up to imagine what life was like back then, and I want to be a Granny Woman. I want to be the person that everyone calls. And I also think about what she got through the experience of being that wise old elder. She was rooted in her community and in her family. She knew what to do in cases of difficulty. The good news is that she knew that the information that she had wasn't sealed off. The plants are still going to grow. The elders are still here, some of them at least for now, and the skills are learnable. The pantry can be built. So none of this actually requires a homestead or a farm or a degree in herbalism. It requires that you start paying attention and deciding that this matters enough to actually learn it. That's why we're here. Every episode, every skill, every single jar that we put up together is us deciding that this doesn't end with our grandmothers. It gets handed forward to our kids, to whoever comes next. I want you to head over to wilderspace.substack.com. This week in particular, I'm going to be putting up a deeper companion piece on the Granny Woman tradition with some of the specific plants, some of the history, and of course the resources for anyone who wants to go further down this rabbit hole with me. It is all good. I am so stoked. I hope that you read it. I hope you enjoy it. And if this episode meant something to you, if it planted a seed, if it reminded you of someone or it sent you to pick up the phone and call your grandmother, please leave a review. It's genuinely one of the best things that you can do for this show. It's what helps new listeners find us. It takes 2 minutes of your time and it matters more than you. Follow us on Instagram and TikTok at Sovereign Kitchen Society. Come be in this community. Share this episode with somebody who needs it. I am Molly Bravo, and I want you to remember that food is and always will be our medium for connection. I'll see you next time.